The peace of Christ be with you. This is the Midweek reflection for Third Reformed on June 24th. Yesterday here at Third, we had a staff meeting, which we do twice a month. On the second Tuesday of each month, we start our meeting by checking in with each other, sharing how we can be praying for one another, and then actually taking time to do that. And on the fourth Tuesday of the month, we start our meetings by reflecting on Scripture. And for a while now, I've been using the Message to help us do that. If you're not familiar with it, the Message is a translation of Scripture in contemporary language. And it was the project of the late pastor and professor Eugene Peterson, who did most of the New Testament while he was still a minister in the local church. And if you're going to have one copy of Scripture in your possession, I typically wouldn't suggest it's the Message, but I do love it alongside other ones for its ability to help you climb inside a story and hear it in a new way, especially if you've grown up around the Bible and the stories in it feel pretty familiar. And that happened for me a little bit yesterday when we were reading Luke 7. That story starts with Jesus and his disciples doing some work in the region of Galilee, and then they go back to their home base in Capernaum. And when they enter the town, some of the town people find Jesus and say, hey, listen, there's this Roman soldier who lives here. He's always treated us well, and he even oversaw the building of the synagogue. And he's got a beloved servant who is ill. And they urge Jesus to go and see if he can do something about healing him. So while they're walking through town, the Roman soldier in question comes out and meets Jesus in the street. And he says, hey, you don't have to come to my house. Just say the word and the man could be healed. I know the way this works because I'm a man who lives under the authority of others, and there's other people who live under my authority. And when I say to them, go and do this or that, it happens. So just say the word and he could be healed. And I love how the Message puts Jesus' response to that. It says, taken aback, Jesus addressed the accompanying crowd, saying, I have yet to come across this kind of simple trust anywhere in Israel. The very people who are supposed to know about God and how he works. If you are familiar with the story, you know that the Roman takes his leave, goes home, and his servant is alive and well. But what I appreciate about that line from the Message is that it helps us climb inside a little bit and recognize why Jesus was so often disappointed and frustrated with the religious establishment of his day. They were the ones who were supposed to know about God and how he worked. And yet, their expectations of who they thought God was supposed to be and how they thought God was supposed to show up in their midst left them blind to the ways that God was actually showing up in the person of Jesus. It left them on the outside looking in at what the Spirit was actually bringing forth right in their very midst. And I appreciate that because if Jesus sometimes felt disappointed and frustrated with the religious establishment, it means I'm in pretty good company when I feel that way too. Now, it may be strange for you to hear somebody who's an ordained minister in a religious organization say that I often feel disappointed and frustrated in organized religion. But it's absolutely true. And if you've felt that way too in the past, if you feel that way right now, you and I are in good company because Jesus himself knew that experience. 17 years ago, authors Tony Campolo and Brian McLaren wrote a book together where they reflected on some of the ways in which they felt like the church had gotten so comfortable and worked so hard to preserve the way things were that it was missing out on some of the new ways that God was calling the church to show up in our modern world. I love the title they gave to that book, Adventures in Missing the Point. Boy, have I felt that way sometimes in my life of service in the church. Sometimes I just look around and think, we are in the middle of an adventure and missing the point right now. A few years after that book came out, I was fortunate to be able to take part in a series of missional theology conferences with a small group of participants, one of which was Brian McLaren. And I remember having a conversation with him once around this book and the themes in it. And he said, organizations are a community's best effort to preserve past gains. The challenge is that sometimes we get so caught up on preserving those past gains that we miss out on the opportunity to make new gains in the ways in which God is calling us to transform and grow. And that has stuck with me ever since. Organizations are a community's best attempt to preserve past gains. I really love that concept of framing it in that way. We build up infrastructure and rituals and bylaws and guidelines and liturgies and all the stuff that makes up the life of an organized community of faith to try to preserve our past gains. But I think he's also correct in saying that sometimes we can get so caught up with preserving the way things have been that we end up missing out on opportunities for the way things may be. We might even find ourselves blind to the ways in which God is showing up in our midst because it doesn't match the expectations that we had. I've been thinking about those themes a lot lately as we begin to emerge from the kind of strict lockdown phase of this pandemic and move into the stages that are yet to come. Early on, way back in March when I started doing these, I started using that language of the great pause and recognizing that this disruptive experience we're going through carries with it the potential for some real good. Because part of the challenge for change for organized religion is that it can be really hard to stop doing some of the things that have worked well in the past to be able to free up the energy and focus for some new thing that may yet emerge. But in this pandemic experience, so much of business as usual has just stopped. And as we move into this next season of life together as a church, I think there's a choice before us. We can either rush to go back and preserve all those past gains and just work to get things back to what they've always been, or we could take the chance to step back, take a look around, and say, how is God showing up right now? What is the Spirit doing in our midst as a community, as a city, as a nation right now that might call us to some new gains in the life of faith? Well, you can probably tell my bias on which one of those paths I think is the most faithful. I think that if we just rush back to doing all the same things in all the same ways, there could be some comfort in that. But we might be missing out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have had this great pause, and with it the freedom to rethink some of the ways in which we follow after Christ. And I think that that same dynamic can be true in our personal lives as well, as individual followers of Jesus and as families. We could rush back to what was known and comfortable, or we could say, just maybe God might have shown up in some ways that I didn't expect. And that might require some things of me that I didn't anticipate. But I believe that our lives, as individuals and as a church, are at their best when we stay nimble. When we, preserve the things that have brought life and joy and continue to do so now, but also hold things loosely enough to recognize together that sometimes God shows up in unexpected ways, and that we may need to let go of some of what was if we're going to be able to live into what God longs for us to have, to be, to do in this world. So I would love it if you would share some of your own thoughts in the comments below this video. You might want to share a little bit of when you felt disappointed or frustrated in organized religion. You might want to share some of the ways in which you think the church at large, or even our own congregation, has had some adventures in missing the point. You might want to share some of the new ways that you've experienced God showing up. I'd love to hear from you and love for you to be a part of the conversation and the prayerful watching and wondering as we move into whatever's coming next for us, seeking to really stay open to the new ways that God may be calling us to be His people in today's world.